Hello, welcome to this lecture, Applied Animal Nutrition with a course code ADS201. My name is ELISHA LYAWATWA, a tutorial assistant in animal science at Sokoine University of Agriculture. Today we are going to cover the topic known as feeding, and after completing this session, it is my expectation that you will be able to describe various key terms applied in feeding, but also should be able to explain regulation of feeding, but also the theories of feeding. And then finally, you should be able to analyze the key factors that are responsible in affecting the feed intake. Now, in this module 1, which is feeding, there are several key terms that you should understand. And these key terms are food, feeding, feed intake. Also, the feed intake has its types, which are voluntary feed intake and the potential feed intake, but also should be able to explain the ration and the diet, but also you should be able to explain hunger and appetite. So by starting, we are going to see what is food. When we say the food is something which can be eaten. It is an edible material that an animal can consume. And these are the things which contain the nutrients which are responsible to support the works or the functionality of the body. So when we come to the feed, we say a feed, it is just a portion of the food. You have to understand, it is just a portion of the food given to an animal. And this portion of the food always, its composition and its amount is always determined by a farm manager or by a man. So the difference between the food and feed is that food is an edible material, while the feed, it is the portion of that edible material, the portion of that feed. And for example, if you say food, we consider different materials. For example, for the case of animals, we have roughages, which are grasses, we have the concentrate, we have several feedstuffs. But also, when it comes to feed now, for example, if I have my animals and then I know this animal, for it to produce 20 kilograms of milk, I should provide maybe 25 kilograms of feed. So that 25 kilograms of feed, which is a known amount and a known composition, it is what we call the feed now, because I have determined the composition and the proportion. Now, what is feeding? Feeding, this is the complex activity that involves the animal to search for the feed, to recognize what is the feed, and to go for the feed. And then after going to that feed, then starting the eating, which is the ingestion and the digestion as well. So this is the complex activity that the animal always does. When you take your animal to the field, the process of taking the animal to the field, when the animal starts moving to the field, recognizing the feed, starting eating the feed, digesting the feed, the whole process is called feeding. Now, if you go deeper, we have the feed intake. That this feed intake is the component of feeding. When the animal goes to the field, after recognizing the feed, then the animal will start intaking the feed. You will start ingesting the feed. So the process of taking in the feed is what we call the feed intake. And the feed intake has two types. Feed intake has two types, as I said earlier. We have the voluntary feed intake and we have the potential feed intake. Now, what is the difference between the two? When we say voluntary feed intake, this is the amount of feed that the animal can consume when the feed is provided liberally, or when there is a free access to the feed, and when the environmental conditions are favorable for the animal to consume a certain amount of feed. Different from potential. The potential feed intake, this is the actual amount of the feed required by the animal to meet those body requirements. And we say always that potential feed intake is always higher than the voluntary feed intake. Why is it? Because the potential feed intake, this is like the ideal feed intake, the ideal amount that the animal is required to eat, and it is calculated based on the physiological status, based on different factors of the animal and the feed factors. But it is very hard to attain this potential feed intake because there are environmental factors which always affect the process of feed intake. And because of those environmental factors and the some of the feed factors, the animal cannot consume to the the potential amount of the feed that is supposed to intake. That is supposed to feed. So that's why we say always the animal will feed and will consume only the amount that will be favorable to its body, which is say the voluntary feed intake. And to make it simple, the voluntary feed intake is equal to the actual feed intake. And because of the animal factors, as I said, and the feed factors, this animal and the environmental factors, this animal cannot attain that amount of feed which potentially the body requires. And that is why we find that there are actual feed intake or the voluntary feed intake. And there are other terms like hunger and appetite. When we say hunger and when we say the appetite, these are two terms that are acting antagonistic to each other. The hunger and the appetite, all of them are the triggers to the feeding, or the things which makes the animal to go for the feed. But the hunger is different from appetite in a way that hunger is a physiological requirement of the feed, while appetite it's a psychological requirement of the feed. How? Because for the case of hunger, the animal biologically is under the nutritional deficiency. Biologically, the animal faces the nutritional deficiency. When the animal faces the nutritional deficiency, that is when we say the animal is in the hunger state, or when we say the animal is hungry. But if the animal has consumed enough of the feed, then we expect the animal to get satisfied. So after the animal has been satisfied by the feed, it may eventually occur that the animal has seen something which is much more appealing, much more attractive. So the animal will go for that feed, not because the animal is hungry, no, but just because the animal has been attracted to that feed, maybe by the sensory appraisal. You can consider this example, if the animal was feeding the concentrates or the dry grasses, and the animal has consumed it for a long time, but it happens that you provide the green refuges in front of the animal. Obviously, the animal will go for that feed. Why? Because it is much more appealing. It is much more attractive. So that is the difference between the hunger and the appetite. But the hunger is the physiological, the physiological need or the physiological drive to eat, while the appetite is the psychological drive to eat. Now, there's another term called ration and diet. When we say ration, this is the total amount of feed that the animal can be offered or can consume in the duration of 24 hours. While when we say the diet, it is the mixture of feeds that are actually consumed by the animal. So this marks the end of this first session, where we have discussed the different key terms that are applied in feeding. So this will help you so much to be able to understand the principles of feeding. It will help you to understand different practical issues that are going to apply in the next sessions. Thank you very much for your attention. Thank you very much for attending this first session. So I welcome you very well to the next sessions. Please don't plan to miss.
Chuo Kikuu cha Sokoine cha Kilimo